Hi everyone. I just wanted to follow up on my last video about Tartaria. I don't trust Tartaria. We have always had people who've researched the unexplained, who before the internet wrote magazines and books, talked on radio stations like Bill Cooper, and people, passed around audio and videotapes about hidden knowledge, biblical prophecy, also buried historical information that the Smithsonian Institute has hidden, secret societies. But now we have this Tartaria, and we're putting everything that's occulted, secretive, that's been deliberately hidden from the general public under this big umbrella of Tartaria. So any legitimate discussion now about hidden history, civilizations that had technology or knowledge that has now been swept under the carpet, even inventions that people have made that have been put under lock and key, is now under the Tartarian banner. So, I believe there's hidden truths and fabricated histories, timelines that have been messed with, and technologies that we once had that are now obscured by these people. But now people online searching for this information are looking at it through Tartarian coloured glasses. And given the information on who Tartaria were and where they came from and their background, that's kind of frightening to me, because what they've done is they have taken the truth movement and they are now controlling it. We know who these Tartarians are. We know who's controlling it. And for upcoming younger people learning about the world we live in and history that has been hidden from us, will now only see it from a Tartarian perspective if they go down this road, which is becoming sort of mainstream in the hidden archaeology movement. Today I'm going to look into more on the groups of who the Khazars are and move into the beasts of the earth and who and where they come from my perspective. This is going to take me a long time. There's a lot of information. So I'm going to start with the ruins of Atil. The ruins of Atil. One of the least remembered and arguably one of the oldest side stories of Jewish history was the existence of an enormous Jewish state in West Central Asia during the Middle Ages. The Khazar Empire, whose rulers and aristocrats converted to Judaism sometime in the 8th and 9th centuries, may in fact have been the largest Jewish ruled realm in history, dwarfing both ancient and modern Israel. And that's pretty big. It has been theorized that the Ashkenazi Jews were descended in part from Khazars, who had migrated westward into Europe around the 10th or 11th centuries. And just for a timeline picture, the 10th century is around 900 to 1000 AD. About the same time as Yiddish-speaking Jews were migrating eastward from Germany. Now, the Yiddish-speaking Jews, there tends to be two schools on where they come from. The old school was that they came from Germanic region, but a lot of new evidence is showing that they were also from these Khazarian areas. Archaeologists have only very recently discovered the archaeological ruin of Atil, the Khazar capital and possibly the greatest Jewish city of the Middle Ages, and research into the site currently ongoing. Few pilgrims have yet visited the pristine Jewish archaeological treasure. The Khazars were one of the long parade of Turkic peoples who periodically established massive sprawling empires across the great open plains of Central Asia. They first appeared in history in the 6th century AD, well, in the history books, let's put it that way, and were probably related to the Huns, who invaded Europe 200 years earlier. The Khazars filled a unique niche in the Jewish history. During the 7th century, the expansion of the Khazars put them into direct contact with the Sassanids to the south and the Byzantines to the west. So here's this Sassanid-Persian connection. As persecution of Jews increased in both the Christian, Byzantine, and Islamic Sassanid empires, the religiously indifferent Khazar Empire became a haven for Jewish refugees. The Khazars had a long and successful history of playing the various Christian and Muslim states off each other. For many years, they were allies of the Byzantines against the aggressively expanding Islamic Caliphate. It was likely that the Jews fleeing from Byzantium began arriving in Khazaria in large numbers around this time. Later, when the Khazars established more cordial relations with Islam, Jews began immigrating to Khazaria from Persia and Mesopotamia. It is even remotely possible that some of the Jews of Khazaria were originally members of the lost tribes who had settled in Central Asia more than 1,000 years earlier. Now, when I'm reading these articles, I'm just giving the official historical view. Obviously, we need to look deeper into a lot of these information, but on the whole, the bones of the story are relatively true. Timelines, different things like that, perhaps not. The empire of the Khazars became a great cultural bridge across which the Jews of the Middle East stayed in contact with the Jews of Europe. It was also a major focal point to the trans-Eurasian trade routes plied Radahite Jewish merchants. At some point in the 8th century AD, Bulan, the ruler of the Khazars, decided to emulate the rulers of neighboring countries and adopt the God of Abraham, since he viewed Judaism as being the older sibling of Christianity and Islam, and therefore superior to both. And since the Jews at the time had no rival monarch, Bulan converted to Judaism and claimed the throne of David for his own. How many today try to claim the throne of David? Or perhaps the throne of Solomon and his 1,000 concubines, or the Freemasonic 1,000 points of light. Amazingly, this worked. Although the Khazar king was never recognized as David's successor per se, Khazaria was recognized as a Jewish state, the only one to have existed between 135 and 1948 AD. The Jewish Khazar Empire lasted for about 200 years, throughout which time its rulers were in close contact with the important Jewish communities of Mesopotamia and Asia Minor. Towards the end of the 10th century, the Khazar Empire was destroyed in a series of wars against several of its neighbors, notably the new Christianized Rus of Russia. They made their last stand in Crimea in 1016, while some of the Jews of Khazaria remained in the east. The majority seem to have migrated westward into Europe, where they eventually mingled with Jews migrating eastward from Germany. The Khazar capital of Atil, destroyed in the wars with the Rus, would be forgotten until its ruins were discovered in the late 20th century. The ancient cities of the Khazars include its capital at Atil, have been ravaged for centuries by wars and elements. Anything that might have survived until the 20th century was probably destroyed during the communist era by the agents of Joseph Stalin, who wished to get rid of any possible evidence of a racial connection between the Jewish and the Russian peoples. Maybe not the Russian peoples, I would say a connection between the Bolsheviks, yes. It is only in the last decade that serious research into the Khazars has begun again. The archaeological dig site at Samostaleka, outside of Astrakhan, is literally just getting underway. Begun in the 1990s, only a few initial findings have yet been reported. There is little else in the way of description available at this time. However, the ruins of Atil will undoubtedly emerge as one of the most important Jewish archaeological dig sites over the next few decades. The town of Samos Deleka, where the ruins are located, is fairly isolated, being approximately 25 miles southwest of Astrakhan and nearly 500 miles south of Moscow. Because of the relatively recent nature of the discovery, archaeological work and research is still underway, a situation which is likely to continue for some time. Thus, the ruins of Atil are likely off the beaten path for the most dedicated of tourists. So since unfortunately virtually all traces of the Khazarian Empire, and especially any association it had to Judaism, were destroyed long ago, it is expected that ongoing archaeological work will likely reveal new sites in the near future. Now, I wonder why there's no information, and personally I believe that is because they've integrated and become one and the same. We have Radahite Jews trading the Silk Road, the Radahites moving into this Khazarian region when this European persecution happened of the banking Silk Road cartels, I guess you'd call them, money lenders. And so they've integrated as a people. So an embryonic state of Khazaria began to form sometime after 630 AD, when it emerged from the breakdown of the larger Gokturk Khaganate. Gokturk armies had penetrated the Volga by 549, ejecting the Avars, who were then forced to flee the sanctuary of the Hungarian plain. The Ashina clan appeared on the scene by 552. Then they overthrew the Rurans and established the Gokturk Khaganate, whose self-designation was Turk. By 568, the Gokturks were probing for an alliance with Byzantium to attack Persia. An internecine war broke out between the senior Eastern Gokturks and the junior West Turkic Khaganate some decades later, when the death of Taspar Quagan, a succession dispute led to a dynastic crisis between Taspar's chosen heir, the Apa Quagan, and the ruler appointed by the tribal council Ashina Shetu, the Ishbara Quagan. By the first decade of the 7th century, the Ashina Yabgu Tong managed to stabilize the Western Division, but upon his death, after providing crucial military assistance to Byzantium in routing the Sassanid army in the Persian heartland, the Western Turkic Khaganate dissolved under pressure from the encroaching Tang dynasty armies and split into two competing federations, each consisting of 5 tribes, collectively known as the 10 Arrows. Both briefly challenged Tang in eastern Turkestan. And I just want to bring up these arrows. So the combined Western Khaganate were called the 10 Arrows, and this is a Rothschild family heraldry. We have 2 arms, each holding 5 arrows. 10 arrows in total. And I think they're showing who they are. We have a bird here. I'm not sure what bird it is. And a lion, a standing lion of Babylon. This is the Rothschild logo. It's 5 arrows representing 5 brothers. But if we count each side of the arrow, it adds up to 10, obviously. So, it's sort of, you could consider it 10 arrows. And they're saying, oh, this is what the arrows are for. It's for the 5 Rothschild brothers. But it looks more likely to me that now it may be a signal back to their origin, which is the combined Khaganate tribes of the Western Khazarian Empire. So the ancient Jewish history, the diaspora, the Jewish state comes to an end in 70 AD when the Romans begin to actively drive Jews from the home they had lived in for over a millennium. But the Jewish diaspora, dispersion scattering, had begun long before the Romans had even dreamed of Judea. When the Assyrians conquered Israel in 722, the Hebrew inhabitants were scattered all over the Middle East. These early victims of the dispersion disappeared utterly from the pages of history. However, when Nebuchadnezzar deported the Judeans in 597 and 586, remember the Judeans were the southern kingdom of Israel. The northern kingdom was dispersed by the Assyrians. He allowed them to remain in a unified community in Babylon. Another group of Judeans fled to Egypt, where they settled in the Nile Delta. And this is probably where the Alexandrian schools come from. So from 597 onwards, there were three distinct groups: the Hebrews, a group in Babylon and other parts of the Middle East, a group in Judea, and another group in Egypt. Thus, 597 is considered the beginning date of the Jewish diaspora. While Cyrus the Persian allowed the Judeans to return to their homeland in 538 BC, most chose to remain in Babylon. In 63 BC, Judea became a protectorate of Rome. Coming under the administration of a governor, Judea was allowed a king. The governor's business was to regulate trade and maximize tax revenue. While the Jews despised the Greeks, the Romans were a nightmare. Governorships were bought at high prices. The governors would attempt to squeeze as much revenue as possible from their regions and pocket as much as they could. Even with the Jewish king, the Judeans revolted in 70 AD. Now, I often wondered where they were getting all of this tax from. The Romans, clearly Jerusalem was a lucrative city for them. And now, after my studies of the Silk Road and how the Judeans had a major part in policing the King's Road, the Spice Road, and then once they went to Babylon and were taken into captivity, the Idumeans took over that role from the Judeans, and that's where they learnt their trade on the merchant routes. So no doubt after the Maccabeans conquered Idumea and integrated them into their society, these merchants kept up their trade along the Silk Road and the Spice King's Road route. So it would have brought a lot of money into Jerusalem. Hebrew history would only be the history of the diaspora, as the Jews and their world view spread over Africa, Asia, and Europe. So this diaspora started around 70 AD. Shortly after this, or around the same time, we have a lot of Jews moving to the region of Lyon, where the banished Herod kings had gone previously, shortly before. And I dare say it's my belief that a lot of these Idumean convert families went there as well, and they became the Radahite Jews of the Silk Road. These are the Silk Road routes that they travelled. We have these Khazarian regions here near the Ukraine, but they extend right across the Central Asian plains all the way to Mongolia, and initially were the Chinese, and the Tibetans around this region. We have this story about, this is the Times of Israel, leaked report, Israel acknowledges Jews, in fact Khazars' secret plan for reverse migration to the Ukraine. So it is well known that sometime in the 8th to 9th centuries, the Khazars, a warlike Turkic people, converted to Judaism and ruled over a vast domain in what became southern Russia and Ukraine. What happened to them after the Russians destroyed that empire around the 11th century has been a mystery. Many have speculated that the Khazars became the ancestors of the Ashkenazi Jews. Contrarian Hungarian ex-communist and scientist Arthur Koestler brought the Khazar hypothesis to a wider audience in the 13th tribe, in the hope that disapproving a common Jewish racial identity would end anti-Semitism. Clearly, that hope has not been fulfilled. Most recently, left-wing Israeli historian Shlomo Sand, the invention of the Jewish people, took Koestler's thesis in a direction he had not intended, arguing that because Jews were a religious community descended from converts, they do not constitute a nation or need a state of their own. Scientists, however, dismissed the Khazar hypothesis because the genetic evidence did not add up. Until now, in 2012, Israeli researcher Eran El-Haik published a study claiming to prove the Khazar ancestry is the single largest element in the Ashkenazi gene pool. Sand declared himself vindicated, and progressive organs such as Haaretz and the Forward trumpeted the result. Israel seems finally to have thrown in the towel. A blue ribbon team of scholars from leading research institutions and museums has just issued the secret report to the government, acknowledging that European Jews are in fact Khazars. Now, we looked at this Rothschild heraldry, and they know who they are. Perhaps the average Jewish person in Israel or in Europe or wherever they are in the world didn't know this. But these Rothschild people knew this, and they've kept it a secret. This would seem to be the worst possible news given the Prime Minister's relentless insistence on the need for Palestinian recognition of Israel as a Jewish state, and the stagnation of the peace talks, but others have underestimated him in their peril. Speaking of the record, he explained, "We first thought that admitting we are really Khazars was one way to get around Abbas' insistence that no Jew can remain in a Palestinian state. The Ukrainian invitation for the Jews to return was a godsend." Okay, so modern sources have described the Bukhara Jews as, for example, an ethnic and linguistic group in Central Asia claiming descent from the 5th century exile from Persia. So when the Ottoman Empire moved into Turkey and Anatolia, places like that, they pushed the Jews there out and they had to flee. The Central Asian Jews in the Yahudi or Bane Israel, meaning sons or descendants of Israel. In academic studies and in the places they inhabit, they are known as the Bukhara or local Jews. Central Asian Jews live chiefly in the Uzbek cities. So the ethnic origin, there are no written records of the Jews' arrival in Central Asia, neither are there records given on their country of origin. However, evidence exists that by the 10th century, a number of Jews were living in the neighboring areas, eastern Persia and northern part of Afghanistan. The oral tradition of the Central Asian Jews has it that their ancestors came from Babylon and moved on to Persia. Historical records concerning the arrival of the Jews in Samarkand and elsewhere in Central Asia contradict this. The migration is supposed to have taken place in the 13th and 14th centuries, but there have been some later resettlements, for example, in the 18th and 19th centuries. Now, the earlier migration could have been from the Persians being forced out by the Ottoman Empire from Babylon and different regions, the Jews that were left over in Persia and Babylon. The 13th and 14th century migration would more than likely be from the Radahite Silk Road traders. Ethnologists, historians who track the migrations of people tell us after the flood that Japhethites migrated from Asia Minor to the north, beyond the Caspian and Black Seas. They settled in the area of Rosh, that we know today as Russia. Wilhelm Gesenius, the world-class Hebrew scholar, whose Hebrew lexicon has never been surpassed, said Gog is undoubtedly the Russians. He also identified Meshech as Moscow, the capital of modern Russia. Tubal he identified as Tobolsk. the earliest province of Asiatic Russia to be colonized, and also the name of the city in which Peter the Great built the old fortress after the pattern of the Kremlin in Moscow. Meshech was founder of Moshkai, the barbarous people who dwelt in the Moshkin Mountains. He went on to say that the Greek name Moshkai, derived from the Hebrew Meshech, is the source of the name for the city of Moscow. In discussing Tubal, he said Tubal is the son of Rapheth, founder of the Tiberiani, a people dwelling on the Black Sea to the west of Moshkai. His conclusion was these people make up the modern Russian people. So Meshech, the sixth son of Japheth, settled in the northeastern portion of Asia Minor. His posterity ended from the shores of the Black Sea along the south of the Caucasus. He was the father of Roshi and Moshki, who dispersed their colonies over a vast portion of Russian territory, and their names are preserved in the names of Russian and Muscovites to this day. So another line of study reveals that Meshech and Tubal are the ancient Moshki and Tubal, Tiberini, peoples who dwell in the area around primarily south of the Black Caspian Seas. In Ezekiel's day, Meshech and Tubal are mentioned together in Ezekiel 27 as trading partners with ancient Tyre. So modern Lebanon. Today, these regions are in Turkey, possibly including parts of southern Russia and northern Iran. Meshech was located near what was known as Phrygia in Central and Western Asia Minor, while Tubal was located in Eastern Asia Minor. So Meshech and Tubal form portions of modern Turkey. However, later migrations north to Russia mean that this view is also consistent with the first theory. Now, so I think it's important to mention that it says, Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog. So wherever Magog, the son of Japheth, went, his land where he lived, Gog is his people, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. So this place of Gog is the area that dominates the other tribes that descend from Magog and some of the sons of Japheth. The reason why these people are rallied by the dragon and come against the saints is because their chief prince, whoever rules them, whoever's the leadership of this empire, rallies them to do so. So it's the chief prince of Gog and Magog and the dragon rallying the people of this land against the saints. We need to realize that a lot of the time our people, our family, are rallied by lies from this leadership that causes people to have a belief in their worldview. And without the rock of Jesus and the Christian faith, we are tossed to and fro, just as the Bible tells us. And it's really important that any of us within any of our nations can become part of these beasts that become part of an agenda to harm other people, and that the agenda is not for our purpose or our nation's purpose, but it's solely for the purpose of this leadership that is trying to manipulate their own will upon the earth. Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, "You must understand the leading Bolsheviks who took over Russia were not Russians. They hated Russians. They hated Christians. Driven by ethnic hatred, they tortured and slaughtered millions of Russians without a shred of human remorse. It cannot be overstated. Bolshevism committed the greatest human slaughter of all time. The fact that most of the world is ignorant and uncaring about the enormous crime is proof that the global media is in the hands of the perpetrators." I believe that Bolshevism, communism, was ruled by its chief prince, whether that be Rothschilds or somebody higher than them, somebody more hidden than them. But as a whole, their leadership is united and they are deceiving people to commit heinous crimes against humanity, and especially the saints, the Christians. I believe the leaders of Bolshevism are one and the same with the Prince Chief of Meshech and Tubal, the leader of Gog. What happened to the people of Russia through Bolshevism is on our doorstep, and they are coming for us in the West. And it's kind of sad, but I think their job is already half done, because they're not coming in the same way that they did back in the early 20th century. They are using the pharmakia of the Pergamus line of the Herods to get a similar result. The Khaganate of the Khazars thus took shape out of the ruins of the nomadic empire as it broke up under pressure from the Tang dynasty armies to the east, sometime between 630 and 650. After their conquest, the lower Volga region of the east and the area westward between the Danube and the Dnieper, and the subjugation of the Onogur-Bulgar Union sometime around 670, a properly constituted Khazar Khaganate emerges, becoming the westmost successor state of the formidable Gok-Turk Khaganate after its disintegration. According to Omiljan Pritsak, the language of the Onogur-Bulgar Federation was to become the lingua franca of Khazaria. As it developed into what Lev Gamilev called a steppe Atlantis, historians have referred to this period of Khazar domination as the Pax Khazarica, since the state became an international trading hub permitting Western Eurasian merchants safe transit across it to pursue their business without interference, and this was the Radhanite Jews. The high status soon to be accorded this empire, but to the north, is attested by Ibn al-Balhi's Farsnama, which relates that the Sassanid Shah Hasror placed 3 thrones by his own, one for the king of China, a second for the king of Byzantium, and a third for the king of the Khazars. So we have this Sassanid link to the Khazarian Empire. Khazaria developed a dual kingship governance structure, typical among Turkic nomads, consisting of Shadbak and Khagan. The emergence of this system may be deeply intertwined with the conversion to Judaism, and it does seem to be an adoption of the Judean rulership, where they have a king and a high priest. It has been estimated that 25 to 28 distinct ethnic groups made up the population of the Khazar Khaganate. Aside from the ethnic elite, the ruling elite seem to have been constituted out of 9 tribe clans, themselves ethnically heterogeneous. Byzantine diplomatic policy towards the steppe peoples generally consisted of encouraging them to fight among themselves. The Pechenegs provided great assistance to the Byzantines in the 9th century in exchange for regular payments. Byzantium, although sought alliance with the Gok Turks against common enemies, in the early 7th century one such alliance was broken with the Western Turks against the Persian Sassanids. In the Byzantine Sassanid War of 602 to 628, the Byzantines called Khazaria Turkia, and by the 9th century referred to the Khazars as Turks. During the period leading up to and after the siege of Constantinople in 626, Heraclius sought help via emissaries and eventually personally from Gok Turk chieftain of the Western Turkic Khaganate, plying him with gifts and promises of marriage to his daughter Epiphania. Tongyabgu responded by sending a large force to ravage the Persian Empire, making the start of the Third Perso-Turkic War. A joint Byzantine-Turk operation breached the Caspian Gates and sacked Derbent in 627. Together they then besieged Tiflis, where the Byzantines may have developed an early variety of traction debutants to breach the walls. After the campaign, Tong Yabgu is reported, perhaps with some exaggeration, to have left some 40,000 troops behind with Heraclius. Although occasionally identified with Khazars, the Gok-Turk identification is more probable, since the Khazars only emerged from that group after the fragmentation of the former, sometime after 630. Some scholars argue that Sasanian Persian never recovered from the devastating defeat wrought by this invasion. And the Sasanian Empire of Persia was from 4 centuries, 224 to 651 AD. So Khosrau I was the king of Persia and Iran. And this is where we have this first connection of these thrones to the Khazarian Empire. Khosrau I was known for his character, virtues, and knowledge. During his ambitious reign, he continued his father's project of making major social, military, and economic reforms, promoting the welfare of the people, increasing state revenue, establishing a professional army, and founding and rebuilding many cities, places, and much infrastructure. He was the most distinguished of the Sasanian kings, and his name became like that of Caesar in the history of Rome. A designation of the Sasanian kings due to his accomplishments he was hailed as the new Cyrus. So around the year 1524, we have the use of this Safavid dynasty flag. It's a sun with a lamb. In 1576 to 1666, which is another occultish year, the burning of London, we have this flag then being reverted to a lion with a sun. We have the Venetian flag of the lion with the wings. This one's unusual because rather than looking at the book, it's actually standing on the book. It's supposedly the Book of Mark. I doubt that that's what its symbolism actually is. I believe that the sun and the wings are interchangeable because it's the sun with the wings. And we have this Iranian Jewish connection. It says historically it appears that Aryans were the original Brahmin caste in India that introduced the earliest scriptural writings called the Vedas, which Jewish tradition connects to the verse in Genesis 25:6. After Sarah died, Abraham remarried Keturah, which commentaries identified with Hagar, the mother of Ishmael, and had 6 additional sons to whom he gave gifts and sent them eastward to the east country. Commentators note the similarity between Abram and Brahman, as well as other commonalities, and speculate that the gifts of Abraham sent with his sons were the mystical teachings that seeded the Brahmanism. Apparently, the elite Brahmin status was originally connected to the spiritual wisdom they possessed. It is also interesting to note that the word Aryan in Hebrew actually means lion-like, and that 1,500 years before Esther honored Ahasuerus with the title of Lion, Jacob, Abraham's grandson, blesses his son Judah, the one whose name represents the entire Jewish people, who are called Yehudim, Jews, with the following words: Young lion, Aria, Judah, you have risen from prey, my son. He crouches like a lion, like an awesome lion. Who will dare rouse him? In fact, an emblem among Jews, among almost as common as the Jewish star, is the Lion of Judah. So there's just one article that's referring this Jewish Judah lion to the Persian lion. We know that after the Babylonian captivity, the nation of Judah was in captivity to the Median Persians, and many of them stayed in Persia rather than returning to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. It's saying that the lion and sun motif became popular in the Middle East in the 12th century on the Turkish and Mongolic flags and coins. With different dynasties and rulers, the symbols' designs changed as well. So We have this lion and sun motif becoming popular during the 12th century. It's associated with Turkish and Mongolic people. It says the lion and sun, the motif then found its way to Iran, first introduced in ancient Iran during the rule of King Sauster in 1450 BC. The image was that of a sun resting on two wings, with two lions guarding at the base. But then the symbol had taken on new significance. The lion was a mythological symbol of strength and virility. The sun was a manifestation of the ancient god Mithra, who controlled the order of the cosmos. So the lion and sun motif of Iran, a brief analysis by Dr. Kaveh Farouk, says, historically and culturally speaking, the lion and sun have existed as potent mythological symbols of Iran for thousands of years. While true that the background colors of Iranian flags have varied across the centuries, the lion and sun motifs have endured the test of time. Also important to note that the primary standard of the Achaemenian and Partho-Sasanian eras were, as generally agreed at this time, the Eagle standard and the Drafsh-e-Kavani, sorry about the pronunciation everyone, the standard of the Kaveh, respectfully. However, it is possible that the simultaneous depiction of the lion-sun motif may have existed during the late Sasanian era as well, pending the conclusion that the analysis of the finds made in late December 2006 by Iranian archaeological team at the ancient castle of Nishabur and Sadakaya. The brief survey below will discuss the origins of the lion and sun motifs in Iran since the Achaemenid era. So, the late Sasanian era is where the Sasanian Empire came into contact with the Khazarian Empire. Prior to that, the Iranians were using an eagle standard. So pre-Achaemenian era, the sun has been a major ancient Iranic symbol and has appeared alongside the moon in heaven on banners, standards, and flags of Iran since pre-Achaemenian times. And I'm just wondering if the Iranian link to the woman clothed in the sun and the moon at her feet has anything to do with possibly the kingdom of Judah being in captivity in Iran. I'm not sure, but or it could have to do with the Iranian belief in Ahura Mazda, the Zoroastrian religion. It's believed that the Magi, or the three wise men as we know them, were priests in Zoroastrianism and earlier religions of the Western Iranians. The earliest known use of the word Magi is in the trilingual inscription written by Darius the Great, known as Behistun inscription. Old Persian texts predating the Hellenistic period refer to the Magus as a Zurvanic and presumably Zoroastrian priest. So persuasive throughout the Eastern Mediterranean and Western Asia until late antiquity and beyond, Magos were influenced by and eventually displaced Greek Goos, the older word for a practitioner of magic to include astronomy, astrology, alchemy, and other forms of esoteric knowledge. This association was in turn the product of the Hellenistic fascination for Pseudo-Zoroaster, who was perceived by the Greeks to be the Chaldean founder of the Magi and inventor of both astrology and magic, meaning that still survives in the modern day words magic and magician. In the Gospel of Matthew, from the East do homage to the newborn Jesus, and the transliterated plural Magi entered English from Latin in this context around 1200. This particular use is also commonly referred in English as kings and more often in recent times as wise men. The singular magus appeared considerably later when it was borrowed from Old French in the late 14th century with the meaning magician. Hereditary Zoroastrian priesthood has survived in India and Iran. Now, it's saying here that the Greek, or the Magos, was influenced by Greek in its ancient form, they were watchers of the stars, astronomy, astrology, and they were aware of the prophecy of the Messiah, and they followed the astrological sign of the Messiah, which was the Star of Bethlehem. And they do have a messianic belief. So messianism is the belief of an advent of a Messiah who acts as the savior of a group of people. Messianism originated in the Abrahamic religious belief, but other religions have messianism-related concepts. Religions with the Messiah include Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Druze faith, Jesus and Hamza ibn Ali, I'm not sure what that is, Zoroastrianism. So all of these faiths have a belief in a Messiah, and it was seen that the Magi were watching the astrological signs for this Star of Bethlehem, and they were the first to inform King Herod that the Messiah had actually been born. So Mithra, who was to become the sun god, is perhaps one of the best known Iranic gods and was at one time widely worshipped in the Roman Empire. Mithra in Avestan is translated as pact, contract, convenient, as the god who controls the order of the cosmos, hence the change of seasons and night into day. Mithra, who was associated with fire and the sun. This is affirmed in the ancient Yash writings, which describe Mithra as first of the heavenly gods, reached over the Hara al-Borz mountains in Iran before the undying swift-horsed sun, who foremost in a golden array takes hold of the beautiful summits and amid from the looks over the abode of the Aryans, Iranic peoples, with the beneficent eye. The connection between Mithra and the sun is seen in the cult of Mithras, where Mithra is, according to Sinclair, identified with the sun, the bringer of the light to humanity, the mediator to the cosmic struggle. Mithras was also popular in India as a result of the Indo-Iranian migrations to the subcontinent thousands of years ago. The Roman Empire too was also to adopt the cult of Mithras, where it enjoyed a strong following from 100 to 400 AD. So the cylinder of King Shalstar, this is the oldest evidence of the lion sun motif. The primacy of the sun as a major symbol appears to have taken place at a later date during the Achaemenid dynasty, as the moon had played this role with Xerxes' invasion of Greece. In Iranic mythology, the goddess Anahita is the virgin mother of the sun god Mithra. Wow, that's interesting. A plaque from Achaemenid times depicts such a motive scene with Artaxerxes II being in 404 to 359 BC, being faced with a figure of goddess Anahita, who is depicted as riding a lion. In the background of Anahita is clear a depiction of the sun. So just on a side note, we have Ahasuerus in the book of Esther. Ahasuerus is given as the name of the king, the husband of Esther, in the book of Esther. He is said to have ruled from India even to Nubia, over 107 and 20 provinces. So 127 provinces. That is over the Achaemenid Empire. There is no reference to known historical events in this story. The narrative of Esther was invented to provide an aetology for Purim, and the name Ahasuerus is usually understood to refer to a fictional Xerxes the First, who ruled the Achaemenid Empire between 486 and 465 BCE. Persian kings did not marry outside a restricted number of Persian noble families, and it is unlikely that there was a Jewish Queen Esther in any case. In the historical, Xerxes' queen was Amestris. In the Septuagint, the book of Esther refers to the king as Artaxerxes. So according to rabbinical text literature, Ahasuerus, the Persian king of the book of Esther, being identified with by the rabbis with the one mentioned in Daniel one as father of Darius, king of Media, and with one mentioned in Ezra 6, is counted as one of the 3 kings of biblical history who ruled over the entire globe, the other 2 being Ahab and Nebuchadnezzar, as 4 counting also Solomon among them. If there's any truth to the story of Esther, it's said that her husband was Xerxes the Great. So I'm just looking at this genealogical page. According to this, it's saying he was a son of Darius the First, the great king of Persia. He was the husband of Vashti. I've heard different sources say that there's no name of Vashti in the records. It says here, and Queen Esther of Persia. So whoever's done this may have put those names in. But anyway, he was the father of Artaxerxes the First, king of Persia, who was the father of Darius the Second, king of Persia, who was the father of Artaxerxes the Second of Persia. Now, Artaxerxes the Second, at which period this sun and lion motif with the Anahita goddess riding it, was the husband of Aspasia of Scythia. So I'm just wondering if there is any truth to the story of Esther. Was this symbol a recognition to perhaps maybe she was the mother of his grandfather, and the line of Judah mixed with the son of the Persian religion or the god representing the king? Or was it introduced due to his wife's influence, Aspasia of Scythia? She was wife of Cyrus the Younger and Artaxerxes II. It has no more information on who she was the daughter of. And it was in the year 486 BCE to 426 BCE. King Artaxerxes II, facing the goddess Anahita, who sits atop a lion. In the background of Anahita can be seen the clear display of the sun, which is a representation of the ancient Iranic god Mithra. Note that the sun emanates 21 rays, the same symbol which is used by various ancient Iranic cults among the Kurds of Iran, Iraq, and Turkey. The 21 rays may be related to the festival date of Meragan, festival of the sun god Mithra, which takes place from the 16th to the 21st of Mehar of the Iranian calendar. As noted already, the sun is a manifestation of the ancient Iranic god Mithras, whose cult predates the Achaemenid dynasty. The sitting figure of Anahita represents fertility and life. The temples of Anahita often had canals of water streams, most likely representing another aspect of life-giving force of the goddess Anahita. In a sense, the manifestation of Mithras and Anahita go beyond mere tribal symbols. They are an expression of ancient Iranian mysticism and theology. The lion too was another one of ancient Iran's most enduring mythological icons, as well as an ancient symbol of Iranian identity. The theme occurs at the reliefs of the city palace of Persepolis. So the Archimedean eagle, as displayed upon the title of Persepolis, which was, according to Secunda, probably representing the royal standard. This symbol, along with the lion and the ram, was to endure well into the Sasanian times. The lion motive, however, was to survive the Islamic conquest and resurface on the banners and flags of Iran well into the 20th century. So it is also important to note the astrological relationship between the lion and the sun in Iranic mythology, a relationship that has spanned across centuries of time. As noted by Nafisi, the unique relationship between the lion and the sun is an ancient Iranian concept which views the relationship as a zodiac sign. The winged lion, or griffin, as depicted in Archimedean arts, as noted by Darius Khadiva, This image was falsely depicted as a Roman symbol in the blockbuster movie Gladiator, starring Russell Crowe. Much of what is now southern Russia and Ukraine, as well as Central Asia, was settled by northern Iranian peoples known as Scythians, or Saka. The Saka, who represent in the Persepolis relief, shaped in much of their culture, architecture and arts with the Medo-Persian Iranic cousins. One vivid example of the Persepolis-type line motif attracting its prey is seen in the golden large necklace of an Iranian queen or princess who had lived in the vicinity of what is now northern Ossetia in southern Russia in the north of the Georgian Republic. So these people were Japheth's descendants, but were the Iranians from the son of Magog, or were they from one of Japheth's other sons? So the Partho-Sassanid era, Mithras and the Lion. The Parthian dynasty was the first Iranic dynasty to succeed the post-Alexandrian Seleucids in Iran, as noted by the Tertullian. The Parthian standard displayed an image of the sun. The Sassanians defeated the Parthians at Hormozgan in 224 AD. The sun god was an increase in significance during the Sassanid dynasty. Stone inscriptions of Ardashir, for example, do mention the name of Mithras or Meher, which, as stated earlier, is manifested by the sun symbol. The post-Sassanid Iranian epic, the Shahnameh, also states that the symbol of the pre-Islamic Iran was the sun. This is exemplified by this verse. So by Sasanian times, a number of motifs existed which were carried on flags and banners and also appeared on the various artworks. Motifs included the sun disk and the Mithra symbol, lion, tiger, elephant, mythological creatures. While the sun and lion were among the primary symbols of the Sasanian Iran, these are not seen as appearing in a single motif, as each motif was representing its own unique banner flag. So, we have this book here. It's called Khazaria in the 9th and 10th centuries by Boris Shivkov. And it says, according to V. Darkovich, between the 6th and 7th centuries, a restoration of the archetype occurred in Khwarezm and Sogd on a new basis. At the head of the Khwarezmian pantheon came the great goddess Anahita, who had sovereignty. The Khwarezmian rulers, who were descendants of Shayavush, the male companion of the goddess, embodied the god of death and resurrection. In addition to ruling the earth, the middle world, the Khwarezmian goddess who had power over the celestial bodies, the sun and the moon, and the realm of the dead. The goddess could bestow victory and was the patron of the cities of Khwarezm. And I just want to remind everybody of Katy Perry in the halftime entertainment of the Super Bowl, riding a lion into the stadium. The Lion and Sun, Hamlet's Mill, the epic work by Hertha von Derschend, professor of history of science at the University of Frankfurt, and Giorgio di Santillana, professor of the history and philosophy of science at MIT, shows the link between myth and astronomy. They describe myth and folklore as a scientific language of yore and point out that the precession was the number one topic of discussion in the ancient science and was known to ancient culture around the world. Who knows exactly how or when ancient civilizations started using the stars for guidance on Earth, but it is clear that they definitely understood the science of nature affecting us. We all know the story of the three wise men who followed the Star of Bethlehem to find the baby Jesus. This was an important star to the three magi, who were among a group of top Persian scientists, mathematicians, alchemists, and astrologers of their time, because it signaled the movement into a new era. As the age of Aries changed to the age of Pisces, the star brought with it the start of a religion that should completely change life on Earth and would become the largest in the modern world. This bright star appeared at the start of the age of Pisces. The Christianity has always used the fish as its symbol. In Iran, the simultaneous representation of the lion and the sun has often been attributed to the post-Islamic era. especially from the 13th century AD. In reality, the lion-sun motif already appeared together during the Achaemenid era. The oldest evidence for simultaneous representation of the lion and the sun in Iran date to a cylinder of King Salster in 1450 BC. The image that is that of the sun disk resting on a base flanked by two wings with two lions guarding the base. The lion was an Iranic mythological symbol of strength and vitality. The same type of lion hunter theme was found in the theme that is found in the Persepolis is also in the art of the North Iranic people such as the Scythians of the ancient Ukraine and South Russia. The sun is a manifestation of the ancient Iranic god Mithra, whose cult predates the Achaemenid dynasty. So between the Sassanid dynasty and China lived an Iranian tribe called the Sogdians. They were actually a Turkic tribe who became very experienced merchants because they were based on the Silk Road and many goods passed through. They were also expert craftsmen and weavers, and realizing the popularity of the Sassanid pearl roundel textiles, they too started producing it. Due to their relations with the Europeans, they realized that the pearl roundel appeals to all religious denominations, not for religious values but for secular class values. So they adjusted the design a little to make it more secular and commercial, assuring a wider customer base. The lion without wings was introduced in the medallion because a lion, the king of the beasts, is often used both in East and in the West, personifying power and prosperity. It's one of the most used symbols to force throughout thousands of years. Wearing clothes with the figure of a lion was understood everywhere as a personification of supreme power and glory. We can assume that the popularity of the lion in the European flag and coats of arms came from this initiative of the Sogdians. The lion and sun symbol appears in the 12th century, most notably on the coinage of Khosrow II, who was Sultan of Rum from 1237 to 1246. These were probably to exemplify the ruler's power. In Safavid times, the lion and the sun stood for two pillars of the society, state and religion. It is clear that although various alarms and banners were employed by the Safavid during their rule, especially the earlier Safavid kings, by the time of Shah Abbas, the lion and the sun symbol had become one of the most popular emblems of Persia. The Persian lion, now known as the Asiatic lion, was once quite common throughout their historic range in Southwest, South, and Central Asia, and are believed to be the one depicted by the guardian lions in Chinese culture. These incredible creatures were introduced to the Han dynasty by envoys from Parthia and were given the name Shi, which derives from the Persian word for lion, Shir. The Buddhist version of the lion was originally introduced to the Han China as the protector of Dharma, and these lions have been found in religious art as early as 208 BC. Gradually, they were incorporated as guardians to the Chinese imperial Dharma. Lions seemed appropriately regal beast to guard the emperor's gates. So Sogda, or the Sogdians, was an ancient Iranian civilization between Amu Darya and Sir Darya and present-day Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. Sogdiana was also the province of the Achaemenid Empire and listed on the Behusian inscriptions of Darius the Great. Sogdiana was first conquered by Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Achaemenid Empire, and was annexed by the Macedonian ruler Alexander the Great. So Nanaya, or Nana, along with three male deities, was the most important goddess of the Sogdian pantheon. She was usually depicted forearms seated on a lion, with her upper arms holding the anthropomorphic depictions of the sun and the moon. The fresco was discovered in one of the vaulted rooms of the Panjikant Palace, once totally covered with paintings. Nania was popular not only in Sogdiana, but in the neighbouring territories as well, with her depictions found all around the Transyogiana, including Kushan, Bactria, and Khwarezmia. The name of the goddess, as well as her association with the sun and the moon, and probably her animal attribute, the lion, are of Mesopotamian or Hellenistic origins. So I want to know, are the Sogdians actually Iranian in origin, or are they Turkic in origin? Because it appears that the Scythians or the northern Iranians moved into Iran at some period of time from another place, rather than just being northern Iranians. To the Chinese, the Sogdians were the main merchants of the Turk steppe. They played the role of counselors to the nomads and had a strong foothold in the economic and political life of the successive Turk Khaganates, which controlled the steppe from Mongolia between the middle of the 6th and the middle of the 8th centuries. Under what conditions was this establishment effected? The Sogdian presence from Kak to Gansu, that is all along the zone of contact between sedentary and nomadic lands, suggests several hypotheses. The Sogdians could have entered the world of the steppe from Sogdiana. This is the most common and immediately logical hypothesis, but it can be shown that the first contacts between Sogdian and Turks probably took place much further to the east, and that it was from their commercial bases in Gansu that the Sogdians gained a foothold among the Turkic-speaking peoples. The Turco-Sogdian cultural fusion, a test from the 6th to the 10th century, had been preceded by a long proto-history whose examination enables us to give an account of the Sogdian commercial monopoly among the Turks. The Turkic Empire emerged abruptly from the fluid situation prevailing the nomadic world at the end of the 540s. Buman Quaghan of the Ashina clan, after having supported the Ruran, the ethnos then dominant in the steppe, revolted against them in 552 and destroyed them. His second successor, Muqan Khagan, conquered all the steppe in the north of China, while his uncle Istemi, the sizable of Byzantine sources, took in 552 to 575 took control of the western steppes, and in 560, in agreement with the Sassanid sovereign Khusro Anushirvan, Hephthalites, and seized Sogdiana. At the end of the 570s, the Western Turks controlled all the steppe as far as Crimea. With the conquest of Sogdiana by the Turk armies against the Hephthalites in 560, a genuine Sogdo-Turk fusion was created. Numerous examples attest to this. Thus, Kakin Kurbilga, one of the kings of Panjakent at the end of the 7th century, was a Turk, and his successor Duwastik, though bearing an Iranian name, was himself of Turk descent, according to his genealogy as related in the history of Nishapur. So we have this Sogdian link to the Turkic people, the sun and the lion with the goddess, who has the moon and the sun. And even if this was an Iranian origin of the sun and the lion together, and these Sogdians brought it to the Turkic people, I believe that it's the Turkic people who are using this flag of the sun and the lion in the Safavid Empire, the Venetian Empire, and the Safavid and the Venetian Empire had a trade connection. At that time, the Venetians were not trading with what was then Byzantine because the Ottoman Empire had taken it over. But you know, we have this link to the Silk Road and the Sogdians using this motif in their weaving, and it being a religious icon. So I believe that the Iranian throne may have been ruled by these Turkic people, linked to also back in the time of Esther, the Lion of Judah. Perhaps this is just my belief, but perhaps the lion also represents the tribe of Judah, with the sun being of the Mithraic religion combined together if there's any truth in the Book of Esther that she did marry the king of Persia, that it could be that their children were combining the two motives together to identify who they were. So if you look at the Roman Empire, it's to the west of Israel. So we've got Israel here. It was called Judea back in those times, obviously. And we have Rome to the west. And it's also, the west is the Mediterranean Sea. So when you're in Israel or you're a Judean Jewish person of the Roman Empire, to the west you're looking at the sea, to the east you're looking at the land. If we look at the Persian Empire, and what it was more of a landmass area that I was referring to, and we look at the land that they occupied, and it's a massive big portion of the east. After the fall of Rome, we have the beginning of the Holy Roman Empire, and we have the Western Holy Roman Empire, which was ruled from Rome and incorporated Britain, Northern Africa, and we have the Eastern Holy Roman Empire, which was run from Constantinople and incorporated Egypt, Jerusalem, and Turkey. After the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire to the Ottomans, we have a very similar landmass to what the Persians ruled, although the Ottomans never conquered the Persians of Iran. Okay, so that is until we come to the Safavid dynasty. And the first member of the Safavid dynasty, Safavid, hope I'm saying that right, was Ismail the First. But I just want to show you the list of Armenian monarchs going from around the time of Antipater of Idumea, because I believe Antipater is actually the first head of the dragon. Why that is because he had 3 children, Salome, Herod, and Faisal, and it's through the intermarriage of all those children's children that the Herod Empire has moved into these positions in high places. So if we look at Julia of Chalcis, on her mother's side, she's pretty much all Herod. On her father's side, her father was Herod Polio, so Herods again. She has a son, Alexander the First of Cilicia. She married Tigranes the Sixth, king of Armenia, and he was a Herod as well. They don't know who his mother was, but his father was Alexander the Fourth of Judea, whose father was Alexander the Third of Judea. So he was a Herod. His mother was Glapha of Cappadocia. So Julia of Cilicia was the daughter of Alexander the First of Cilicia and Eutape of Commagene. And it's on this side where they sort of, this branch of these Armenian Parthian family come into it. So Eutape of Commagene, Antiochus III, king of Commagene, Mithridates III of Commagene, and his family. I mean, it's a distant, it dates back to Parthian lines. On this side, a distant line to Parthian royalty, and not directly in the Iranian or Parthian royal family. The kings of Armenia trace back to this Parthian lineage. These royal families were intertwined, Armenians, Parthians, and obviously the Seleucid empires, Egypt. So through these family lines of Commagene, they date back to the Persian Empire. So it's going, a few hundred years back probably. So the Safavid dynasty in 1576 made this image their flag, the lion from Venice. It's almost identical, except the Venetian lion has the book and the wings. Now, the Safavid lion has a sun in place of the wings. We have the Zoroastrian Ahura Mazda, the sun god with the wings. So this makes a little bit more sense about this lion with the sun behind it and this lion with the wings. So this Safavid dynasty has something to do with the Venetians at this time in 1576 to 1666. They somehow are linked with the Venetians. The Safavid kings themselves claimed to be Sayyids, family descendants of the Islamic prophet Muhammad. Although many scholars have cast doubt on this claim, there seems now to be a consensus among scholars that Safavid family hailed from the Iranian Kurdistan and later moved to Iranian Azerbaijan, finally settling in the 11th century CE at Ardabil. Traditionally pre-1501, Safavid manuscripts trace the lineage of the Safavids to the Kurdish dignitary Firuz Shah Zarin Kola. So according to historians including Vladimir Minorsky and Roger Savory, the Safavids were of Turkicized Iranian origin. This Safavid dynasty seems very suspect to me. They're using this flag that's almost identical to the Venetian flag. They don't actually come from Iran. They come from a district that is near Iran or on the border of Iran, which is in the Kurdish region. And they were Turkic speaking. There's claims back to be descendants of Muhammad, which shows that they're not Iranian there. And there's a lot of Turkic intermarrying and Georgian intermarrying. So this is Khazarian. So these they had diplomatic relations with Venice when the Iranians, the Ottoman Empire, would have nothing to do with Venice as far as I can find. In fact, they were enemies. So I just found this paper by Michu Colombo Daniel, and it's the Royal Hittite title, My Sun, and the Winged Sun Disc. So the paper argues against the accepted theory that the Syrio-Hittite winged disc was inherited from Egypt. Iconographic traditions developed independently, deeply embedded in local mythologies. From Sumer to Anatolia, the eagle Anzu myth created as scooped out feature with originally short wings and a rosette disc meaning divinity as an alternative symbol for the eagle's head. In the Nile Valley, the founding theme is the identity between the Horus falcon and the king, a hero bird man wump, probably inherited from the Sumerian Gilgamesh cycle and adapted to the local culture of the said rejuvenating rituals. Nevertheless, the underlying saga seems to have been a universal one on how to unite soul and heart and achieve mystic theogamy within the body's sacred tree. The saga seem to have been much developed by Indo-European populations during the second millennium, rooted in Neolithic symbols, the main one being the rosette. It finds revealing explanations in the medieval Sanskrit Tantra texts, distributed Vedic wisdom contemporary to Hittite venture. So during over 400 years, between 1625 and 1210, or 1670 and 1185 BC, the Hittite kingdom rose and disappeared in a period that spanned active war and peace events between the dominating powers Assyria, Syria, Anatolia, and Egypt. Meanwhile, treaties and diplomatic correspondence developed a common custom of referring to the king as my son, metaphorically meaning His Majesty. Yatu Sili the first, founder of the Hittite kingdom, thus addressed himself in his political testament. But it is only during the empire from Sapilaluma I onwards that the solar title eclipsing the Tabana I was subscribed to kings and also to some queens. So during the Middle Kingdom, the winged disc appears first over a royal figure, then over the king's name and title in hieroglyphic form, and so called aedicula, after which it invariably hovers over royal monograms on seals and monuments. It is a divine attribute incarnated in kingship. Old Hittite rituals refer to the king as Utu Samis, our son. According to the current opinion, the Hittites would have adopted from Syria the Egyptian winged disc, confused with the Babylonian sun symbol because of Egypt's prestige in Syria. The Mitannian princess wedded to pharaohs. A direct influence from Egypt to Hittite has also been suggested. The present contention argues a Syro-Anatolian winged disc elaboration in a Mesopotamian mythological context, independently from the Egyptian one, and possibly older. Nevertheless, Eastern and Western solar theologies did not convey similar spiritual claims, even though local speculations created distinct repertoires. But how the saga limited kingship remains abstruse to modern scholarship. The key to understanding here proposed is the saga symbol conveyed a philosophia perennis, for which explanations are found in later tantric teachings. The complete absence of Egyptian features on Mitannian glyphic, albeit material ties, does not favor the prestige argument. Yet Egyptian iconography undeniably occurs on second millennium Syrian seals. According to B. Tessia, they represent 14% of the figures and 1.01% of the symbols. Her conclusion is that there is no evidence to suggest that the motif, the winged disc, was not adapted from Egypt, but the winged disc is systematically treated as an Egyptian feature, even when the associated motives are alien to Egypt. Consequently, percentages are biased. The Assyrian winged disc with a rosette should be an adapted version of the Egyptian prototype. This viewpoint suffers from the general assumption that the rosette is a mere decorative motif. It is here stressed that this is definitely not the case. The Egyptian disc was always plain, except in much later periods. Even then, it never includes a rosette. It is generally appended with urae and embedded in the wings, whereas the Syro-Hittite rosette disc sits in or above scooped out wings. So when we go to have a look at what the rosette is, so it's a protection symbol for the home, the 6-petal rosette on the crossbeams. The 6-petal rosette, the flower-like symbol created by overlapping 7 circles, as well as the expanded variants with 7 interlocking rosettes and 19 interlocking rosettes. the later is called the flower of life in the New Age movement, is an ancient symbol that has been used across cultures and religions for millennia. So the rosette is a solar symbol in many cultures, and many peoples believe it to be magical. It was commonly used as a decorative motif to adorn doors, ceilings, beams, crosses, cornices, coats of arms, everyday objects, furniture, musical instruments, ritual items, and graves. In ancient Slavic tradition, the rosette was associated with the chief pagan god Perun, the god of thunder and lightning, and was supposed to protect against lightning and generally ensure the favor of the thunder appropriately. The symbol is also called the symbol of Perun and a thunder mark in Ukrainian. So here's some examples of the rosette. So it seems to have originated in this Ukrainian region. The people from this area where the Hittites originate from, their gods were that of the goddess and her father, the storm god. It's probably an early version of Thor. So this is about Ukraine's pagan history. Perun, the god of thunder, lightning, and rain, was once considered the supreme deity of the ancient Slavs and later became known as the god of war. The open steppe of Ukraine's landscape meant that houses and crops were often vulnerable to wicked storms, compelling Ukrainians to worship Perun in the hopes that he would show mercy. Perun was also influential in Kievan Rus, that the primary chronicle mentions the oath sworn to the deity when an agreement was made with the Christian Byzantine Empire in 944 until the church replaced Perun with Saint Elijah. Suska, also known as Shashushka, was the Hurrian Hittite goddess of fertility, war, and healing. She was worshipped throughout the region known as Hanegalbat, today present-day Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, from the time of the Hurrians through 3300 through the kingdom of Mitanni, throughout the Hittite Empire and beyond. She is identified with similar powerful female deities of other cultures such as Inanna, Ishtar of the Akkadians and Assyrians, Isis of Egypt, Astarte of the Phoenicians, Usha of the Rig Veda of India, Aphrodite of the Greeks, who became the Venus of Romans, and Amaterasu of Japan. Through her links with Astarte, she is also identified with the Sumerians of Mesopotamia, with the divine Semiramis of Mesopotamia, who was made famous through the legend recorded by Greek historians. So she's identified as Inanna in the ancient Sumerian goddess of love, sensuality, fertility, procreation, and also of war. She is often shown in the company of a lion, denoting courage, and sometimes even riding the lion as a sign of her supremacy over the king of beasts. The symbolism of 8-folded rosettes, 8-petal rosettes similar to those on the disc and on the various ancient game boards, appeared also on many other objects. They were generally a symbol of the sun, or more precisely its cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, and so indicated the passage from one state of existence into another. In Mesopotamia, the 8-leaf rosette was also the emblem of the fertility goddess Ishtar and her planet Venus. However, this apparent broadening of the symbol only confirms its basic meaning of birth, death, and rebirth. A well-known myth, Ishtar descended into the underworld and was held there as dead before she returned to life and to life-giving, just as Venus, the evening star, disappeared from the sky for some time and then heralds as morning star the return of the life-giving light. The symbolism is the same as that derived from the cycles of the sun. So this god here, Kumarbi, was an important god of the Hurrians, regarded as the father of gods. He was also a member of the Hittite pantheon. According to the Hurrian myth, he was the son of Alalu and one of the parents of the storm god Teshub. He was also the father of Suska, who was the early predecessor of Inanna, showed riding the line. Teshub was the Hurrian god of sky, thunder, and storms. The Hittite mythology, Iluanka, was a serpentine dragon slain by Tahuns, the Hittite incarnation of the Hurrian god of sky and storm. It is known from Hittite cuneiform tablets found at Kurum Bazazkoi from the former Hittite capital Hattusa. The contest is a ritual of the Hittian spring festival of Puruli. Puruli was the Hittian spring festival held at Nerik, dedicated to the goddess Hanana. Now, let's have a look at this, because this may have something to do with the Feast of Purim and the use of the masks in the city of Venice. Puruli was a Hattayan spring festival held at Nerik, dedicated to the earth goddess Hanana, who is married to a new king. There we go. That's the story of Esther. The central ritual of Puruli festival is dedicated to the destruction of the dragon, Iluanka, by the storm god Teshub. The corresponding Assyrian festival is the Akitu of the Enuma Elish. Also compared are the Canaanite poem of Baal and Psalms 93:29. Nerik was a Bronze Age settlement to the north of the Hittite capitals Hattusa and Sapinawa, probably the Pontic region. The Hittites held it as sacred to the storm god, who was the son of Warusumu, sun goddess of Arena. The weather god is associated or identified with Mount Zeliyanu near Nerik. So Nerik is in northern Turkey, right in the middle. But as we found out, the Hittites came from up around the Ukrainian region of the Black Sea. So what I'm trying to find out here is the image from Venice, which clearly has nothing to do with the Book of Mark. Is it from Persia, who adopted this image later on in their history after the Hittites? From probably the Babylonians, who would have adopted it from the Assyrians, and the Assyrians from the Hittites. Does this come from them in Venice, or does it come the other way around via the Silk Road from the Khazarian people? Remember, we have Nanea riding the line. It says she was the goddess of love. In India, they have the goddess Durga riding a line with the sun behind her head. Iluanka is probably a compound consisting of two words for snake, Proto-Indo-European. So the first version of the storm god and Iluanka fight, and the serpent wins. The storm god then goes to the Hattian goddess Anaris for advice. She was the goddess of the wild animals of the steppe, Inara, and daughter of the storm god Teshub, Tahunt. She corresponds to the Potnia Theron of Greek mythology, better known as Artemis. Having promised to sleep with a mortal named Hapasias in return for his help, she devises a trap for the dragon. She goes to him with large quantities of food and drink to entice him to drink his fill. Once drunk, the dragon is bound by Hapasias with a rope. Then the storm god appears with the other gods and kills the dragon. So this woman riding a lion is an ancient Proto-Indo-European story that has come through the Hittites and into the region of Anatolia. Now, was it there beforehand? It quite likely probably was, because these people are from the children of Japheth And so this story is more than likely a pre-flood story. Early leadership asserted power with the rosette symbol, an old symbol found in Neolithic trading stamp seals distributed between Anatolia and Halifaean Syria during the 6th and 5th millenniums. A wealth of stamp seals bearing rosettes have been retrieved from early and Middle Bronze Age Anatolian sites and Mesopotamian sites. The rosette is an ancient regal insignia found alone or in diadems of divine and royal foreheads. From Uruk IV, 3400 BC onwards, the rosette was the goddess Inanna's symbol, subsequently used as pictogram for God in Syria and Sumer. Later, cuneiform writing simplified pictograms, and consequently rosette and star became confused motifs. From III onwards, the sun god Utu is illustrated by a star, rosette or cross disc over a moon crescent. The crescent sun disc recalls the masculine feminine Inanna, twinship Nanna, the moon god, being their father. So the mother-father relationship is told in the story of Joseph's dream in Genesis 37. Verse 9, then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had a dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Somogram was used by the Hittites to note the native word for rosette, sitar. In the Hittite oracle, a neglected Ayaru festival is said to have caused Ishtar of Nineveh to be angry in her temple. The splayed eagle and his short wings. Anzu, the splayed eagle, is the most important figure of archaic iconography from Jemdet Nasser to Akkadian times. So his cut-off wings, treated as a cosmic trophy, became a symbol of cosmic power. In the Etana myth, the eagle takes Etana, the first king of Kish, on his back, soaring up to heaven to find the plant of birth. Anzu is an ambitious figure. He symbolizes right and wrong, use of power. In early dynastic periods, his culture is well established. Shrines are dedicated to Anzu. His heraldic representation of a splayed figure stands above them, and his cut-off wings are appended on either side of shrines. Now, in Daniel, the book of Daniel, it talks about the line of Babylon, which stands like a man, and the wings are cut off. So this would be referring to this eagle, lion, interchangeably, Anzu story. Then in Revelation 12, let's start from verse 13. And the dragon saw that he was cast into the earth. He persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. And the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the face of the serpent. So was she given the wings of an eagle from this Babylonian lion that were plucked off, or from the bird that had its wings clipped? Anzu in Dagad acquires a sun disk belly in Sumer and Syria. A rosette in crescent becomes a substitute for Anzu. So this is definitely a Hittite symbol. Now, as I said, these people are the tribes of Japheth, so possibly they all followed this tradition. It could possibly have started with the very early Hittite peoples. The Egyptian wing disc had 2 names. The early historical Beh-Diti, referring to the falcon god Horus, was the general term. Epi-Wer, the great flyer, was a late and local designation in the great Edfu myth. The legend of the winged disc, the Edfu legend, explains how the winged disc came about. The sun god Ra Harakati landed in the nome of Edfu with Bet-Deti, who flew up Pi to heaven as Pi were, the great flyer, to storm the rebels and foes. His bark had 2 urae to terrify crocodiles and hippopotami. Epi conquered the foe at each landing of Ra. So in the end, Ra ordered Thoth, "Thou shalt make this winged disc in every place in which I have rested, in every shrine of Upper Egypt and every shrine of Lower Egypt." Thoth executed the order, and that is why the emblem is seen on every temple door lintel over in the entire country. The town Bet-Det has been identified with Tal el-Balaman in the northern delta. The original northern Horus cult would refer to an early, non-defined pre-dynastic period before Upper Egypt took political power over the whole Nile Valley from Aswan to the delta. The date of the takeover, if it did occur at all, is still a matter of debate. The name Bet-Det was duplicated and applied to Edfu in Dynasty 3 when Horus extended his power over the divine conclave of Upper Egypt. The pharaoh's first name was the Horus name, representing the earthly embodiment of the falcon god Horus. Falcons single or affronted over the nameless Surek palace facade representing authority first occur in pre-dynastic Nakwada, 3350 BC, on pottery seals and centers from Sinai to Nubia. Dates are still under discussion. The earliest mention of Bet-Deti occurs in the Step Pyramid precinct of Doja, 2630 to 2611 BC in Dynasty 3, on a dummy chapel relief that was part of the said royal rejuvenating rites. And it's said that Pharaoh Djoser was the pharaoh of the time of Joseph. There is an inscription on the island of Shihil near the first cataract of the Nile known as the Famine Stele. It is a copy of a manuscript written 1,000 years earlier. It tells of Imhotep and Pharaoh Djoser in the 18th year of Joser's reign and has striking parallels with the biblical story of Joseph. So the great god of variegated plumage on sail top of Sahur's state ship depicted in his mortuary temple at Abusir. The large sail is entirely decorated with rows of rosettes, a unique case. The king's Horus name figures on a column of the temple over which stands a plain disc with urae under the PT sign for sky. According to a gardener, the winged disc and the PT sign are alternate sky symbols. So, the sacred tree and the symbolic meaning of the winged sun disk, the Eastern iconography, especially Assyrian one in the 2nd millennial, definitely harps on the tree of life or sacred tree theme. Endowed by a winged goddess, the king is portrayed as a birdman whose authoritative symbol is a winged pillar or sacred trunk. Hittite repertory follows, what is considered a new concept introduced by Indo-European populations whose homeland is a long debate subject. However, in Hammurabi's time, sacred trees flanked and or encircled the door of the holy well Apsu on the ziggurat of over which stood the magical link, a solar disk quoted above. Ritual dependence did exist between the sacred tree, solar disk, and Anzu. Noteworthy is the fact that Mitannian kings all have Indo-Aryan or Vedic names. Vedic deities such as Mithra, Varanu, Indra, and Nastya are found in the 2 Hittite Mitannian treaties between Sub-Iluma and Satiwaza, and the fire god Agni. Prototype of Brahman is found in 2 Hittite rituals. Now at the base of the sacred pillar is the door of Brahman. So I won't go on with this, but it's a big rabbit hole to go down as far as the tree of life, the trees of the Garden of Eden, the Pharaoh and the king of Tyre being referred to as mighty trees or cedars. And the Bible is talking about what these people were symbolizing. And why was that? You know, we're told that these cultures and religions are pagan, and yes, was the downfall of a lot of these civilizations. But there must be a reason why they were worshipping this. And often the worship of these things wasn't the problem. It was more the way that they worshipped it, because they started to worship idols of wood and stone and didn't understand the meaning behind them. So we have this in this symbol here, the serpents or the stake, the winged discs on the top. In the Bible, Moses places a bronze staff in the desert with a serpent on it, which represented healing, where the cult of Asclepius sort of originate from, or from this Brahmin. Tree of life, or Kundalini theory. It would make sense that all of the sons of Noah understood the same knowledge. They both came from an antediluvian background. So the fact that the descendants of Japheth and the descendants of Ham is what they say the Egyptians were using the same iconography around the same time, around 3,300, 500 BC. Is it no surprise? Noah's Ark landed somewhere up in Armenia and Turkey in the Mount of Ararat. So it makes sense to me that at the end of time, we go back to the beginning of time. The beginning of the story is what set the stage for the end of the story. And that these three sons of Noah, the three groups of people, become the beasts of the earth. And this is why I believe that the Parthian empire, or the land that was held by them, because when you think about it, in the book of Daniel you have the Babylonians, which were subverted by the Medo-Persians, and then in turn them by Alexander the Great. They weren't all the same people, but they ruled the same region. And as I said, by no means saying that the Herod family married into the Iranian royal family, although they did marry into a branch of it. This article about Herod the Great, friends of the Romans and the Parthians. Often we think of Herod the Great in relation to ancient Rome. We understand the king as steadfast in his loyalty to his Western imperial power. And rightly so, Herod's behaviour routinely betrayed his Roman interests, and inscriptions attest to and advertise his allegiance by identifying him with such titles as friend of the Romans. It is entirely appropriate then to apply the modern label Roman client king to Herod, as scholars have done for so long. Another view of Herod, however, complicates this picture. Herod was not merely a passive subject of Rome. In fact, we only view Herod against the Roman backdrop. We risk misunderstanding the circumstances of his rise to power and underestimating his accomplishment. While the Romans were indeed a key source of Herod authority, he rose to power and maintained his position through timely manipulations and the contentious geopolitics that define his day. Rome was not the undisputed master of the Near East. The empire of Parthia stretched from modern Afghanistan through Iran to Euphrates River in Iraq, encompassing territories once ruled by Persian kings and then by Alexander the Great and his successors. Interesting, for nearly 500 years, in 250 BCE to the 220 CE, the Parthian state was the only advanced civilization that bordered the Roman Empire, and the two states were not without violent encounters. In 53 BCE, the famed Crassus led Roman legions into the Parthian Empire only to see his troops massacred and to die violently himself near. Later, between 439 BCE, the Parthian king Orodes II conquered and controlled the Roman Near East, including Israel, until Mark Antony organized a counter-offensive that drove his forces from the region. For the Romans, the damage was done. Henceforth, no one would see the Romans as invincible and their control of the Near East certain. Herod faced this volatile situation and exploited it to his advantage. Indeed, it was no coincidence that the Romans entrusted the throne to Judea to Herod the Great at the close of 40 BCE, the same year of the Parthian conquest. During the campaign, the Parthians installed Antigonus, son of Aristobulus II and scion of the Hasmonean dynasty. As king of Judah, Herod fled to Rome to use this event to make a bid for kingship. He sought out Antony and underscored the Parthian threat, and threw in a bribe for good measure. As the ancient sources make clear, the strategy worked. The Parthian actions motivated the Senate to make Herod the Great king. In this situation, Herod is best seen as a manipulator of Rome's confrontation with Parthia for his own advantage. Herod then took the first opportunity to further his position by working with the Parthians. On the Roman side, Herod was in good shape. After the Senate made him king and Herod pacified his new kingdom, Antony and Antigonus executed in 37 BCE and thus eliminated Herod's most potent rival. But Herod still had a Parthian problem. He must have feared another Parthian invasion of the Roman Near East. When the Parthians invaded Palestine in 40 BCE, they arrested Hyrcanus II, a high priest and member of the Hasmonean family, and cut off his ears. The Parthians then carried him back to their empire to retreat from Roman troops. Despite the disfigurement which disqualified him for holding the high priesthood, Hyrcanus remained the ranking member of the royal Hasmonean family. Might the Parthians not try to make Hyrcanus their own vassal king in Judea? Herod hedged his bets. He wanted to have Hyrcanus in his own possession and to have the Parthians as friends. To achieve these ends, after Orodes perished in 37 BCE, and with him the worst of the bad blood between Herod and the Parthians, Herod immediately opened diplomatic relations with his successor, Phraates IV, in 36 BCE. He sent the new king presents and pledges and requested permission for the return of Hyrcanus, which was granted. Though not explicitly mentioned in the sources, this exchange must have returned in some level of official amicability between Herod and the Parthians. In short, it was the advantage of Herod to be friend of the Romans and the Parthians. It is ironic, however, that not long after Herod was compelled to break with the Parthian king in 3130 BCE, Herod's Roman situation changed dramatically. Defeated at the Battle of Actium, Antony took his own life, and Octavian, soon to be hailed Augustus, the first Roman emperor, now controlled the Near East. Before embarking for his well-known meeting with Octavian, Herod executed Hyrcanus and thereby eliminated the last surviving Hasmonean heir. This act limited Octavian's choices and rendered Herod more necessary. Even if unsavory to the Romans, Herod's judgment in this decision seems sound, at least in its effectiveness. He remained king. The high-profile murder, however, had a downside. It likely alienated Herod from Phraates IV, who would have been irritated by the political black eye Herod's actions created for him. The king's subjects, especially the Babylonian Jews who honoured Hyrcanus, would have been displeased with him, thinking either that Phraates conspired with Herod the king, about the Hasmonean death, or that the turn of events reflect the king's weakness of judgment and failure to command respect among regional dynasts. At the very least, then Phraates would have had to cut off diplomatic engagement with Herod. We certainly hear no more of diplomatic exchanges between the two monarchs, but perhaps for Herod there was a thin silver lining. Octavian now could be assured of his loyalty. Where else could Herod turn? To come to a full appreciation of Herod the Great, we must understand him as more than one-dimensional Roman frontman. He actively and aggressively manipulated the complex imperial circumstances of his day to secure a position of authority for himself. In the process, the friend of the Romans also became a friend of the Parthians, even if the friendship appears short-lived. After more than a century of intense scholarly scrutiny, there remains much more to learn about Herod the Great. So we have this Roman Empire in the west, around the sea coast, the coastal people, which in Genesis, the promise or the blessing to Japheth from Noah was given that his people would be coastal people. So the beast of the sea, ruled by Rome, the Roman Empire, and in this eastern part of the world, we have the Parthian Empire, and almost slap bang in the middle, we've got Israel. And we have between them Herod, the dragon, and he's playing each one against each other, not knowing whether to pick sides. And in Revelation, it tells us that the dragon gives power to the beast of the sea but the beast of the earth speaks like a dragon. So it speaks for the dragon or what the dragon wants. I'm just going to read this slideshow, the history of Georgian civilization. So Iberia, Caucasus, foreign affairs, policy and cultural influences. The Romans, the Parthians, and ethnical diversity of Iberia. Romanization was a globalistic process implying the spread and establishment of Roman political economic norms and culture in the province of the empire and neighboring countries. Other examples of globalization: Achaemenid Iran or the empire of Alexander the Great performed the function of globalization. History of globalization. Traits of globalization can be traced to as far back as the Roman Empire. The Silk Road started in China, reaching portions of the Parthian Empire and ended in Rome. The trade route helped to integrate the three economies of the Han Dynasty, Persian and Roman empires. In a number of provinces of the Roman Empire, Romanization was attended by the development of technological process, communication and east-west contacts, a process of assimilation and cultural synchronization of peoples occurring in the annexed countries under the aegis of Pax Romana. Pax Romana means Roman peace. The Romans first came to Trans-Corsica, including the Iberian kingdom, in the 1st century BC. Pompey was the first Roman to enter Iberia from Armenia in 65 BC en route for Colchis. The Colchian coast was a strategic region for the Caucasus, Asia Minor, the Bosphorus. Colchis were incorporated into Roman Empire as her provinces. In the eastern policy of Rome, the Black Sea area communications were indispensable in her rivalry with such powerful a state as Parthia. The former kingdom of Colchis was reorganized by the Romans into the province of Lazium, ruled by Roman legati. Iberia was just a client state and was never actually part of the Roman Empire. Roman political influence on the Kingdom of Iberia, Kartli, did not last long. In the second half of the 1st century BC, Kartli, Iberia, and Albania detached themselves from Roman dominion. A client state is a state that is economically, politically, and militarily subordinate to another more powerful state in international affairs. When Mark Antony campaigned against Parthia in 36 BC, neither Iberians nor Albanians joined him. 37 and 36 BC revolts against Roman authority broke out first in Albania, then in Kartli, Iberia. The Roman legions under Publius Canidius Crassus entered Georgia to put down the revolt, but Crassus' campaign proved to be the last Roman effort to subdue Georgia. By the last decade of the 1st century BC, Kartli, Iberia, and Albania were completely free from Rome. Other historical actor, the Parthians. The Parthian Empire is a fascinating period of Persian history, closely connected to Greece and Rome. Ruling from 247 BC to 228 AD, in ancient Persia, Iran, the Parthians defeated Alexander the Great's successors. The Seleucids conquered most of the Middle East and Southwest Asia, controlled the Silk Road, and built Parthia into an Eastern superpower. The Parthian Empire revived the greatness of the Achaemenid Empire and counterbalanced Rome's hegemony in the West. Parthia at one time occupied areas now in Iran, Iraq, Turkey, Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Pakistan, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, and Israel. Diplomatic games in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. Iberian kings successfully used Rome for the consolidation of the political power in the struggle against Parthia. The trade route that linked eastern countries with the Western world via Georgia was in Rome's economic and political interests. Kingdom of Iberia played an active part in Rome's foreign policy, emerging as her ally in the Near East, Tacitus and Dion Cassius. The Emperor Augustus recognized Iberia as an ally and raised Roman taxes from the region. Armenia remained a bone of contention between Parthia and Rome into the 1st century AD. It was divided. Kartli, Iberia emerged as a more powerful state and gained profits from divided and conquered Armenia. In AD 35, Parsman I, Pharasmanes of Iberia, ally of the Romans, defeated the Parthian king of Armenia and placed his brother Mithridates on the throne, AD 35 to 51. So there is a Herod linked to Pharasmanes, Parsman I, king of Iberia, and that is through his wife. So his wife was a princess of Armenia, whose father was either Tigranes the fourth king of Armenia or Tigranes the fifth king of Armenia. They don't know because her mother, Arato, queen of Armenia, was married to both Tigranes the fourth king of Armenia and Tigranes the sixth king of Armenia, who was the son of Alexander the fourth, son of the Judean Herod line. Arato was the queen of Armenia from the Artaxid dynasty. She ruled as Roman client queen from 10 BC until 2 BC. Her brother husband, King Tigranes IV, after living in political exile for a number of years, she co-ruled as Roman client queen from 6 to 12 with Tigranes V, her distant paternal relative and possible second husband. She may be viewed as one of the last hereditary rulers of her nation. Now, she ruled with Tigranes V, who was also known as Tigran V, was a Herod prince who ruled as a Roman client king of Armenia. So it's telling us here that he was a paternal relative, and his father was Alexander, son of Herod. So she was a Herod. This doesn't seem to make much sense because it's telling us that she was the second child and known daughter born of King Tigranes III. She had an older paternal half-brother, Tigranes IV, who was her half-brother and king. And it also tells us that she married Tigranes V, her distant paternal relative from her father's side, who was a Herod. So that would then make Tigranes III related to the Herods some way as well. See, Tigranes III was the second son born to Artavasdes II of Armenia by an unnamed mother. So I would say that that mother was a Herod. In 51 AD, Pharasman or Pasman, son Radamistes, defeated his uncle Mithridates at Garnai and briefly became king of Armenia, only to be executed by his father. Armenia was taken by the Parthians, who gave the crown to Turdat, the founder of the Parthian Sassanid dynasty in Armenia. Okay, Iberia and Rome fought Parthia and Armenia until the Peace of Randeia, when Roman suzerainty over Armenia was recognized by the Parthians in exchange for Roman acceptance of the Sassanid king Turdat Tiridates. Mithridates of Iberia, Pasman's son, to ally himself with the Alans, nomads from the north, with whom he campaigned several times to Armenia. In about 141 to 144 AD, Antonius Pius invited the Iberian king Pharasmanes II and his wife to Rome. When Pharasmanes the Iberian and his wife came to Rome, the emperor extended his kingdom and allowed him to sacrifice on the capital. Antonius Pius set up a statue to Pharasmanes on horseback in the Temple of Bologna and watched the martial exercise of the king's son, and the rest of the Iberian elite. The residence of Iberian kings was at Armaziki in Mtskheta, cities of the Roman period and the early Middle Ages. Mtskheta, I'm not going to go on with those. A stone inscription discovered at Mtskheta speaks of the 1st century ruler Mihirdat I, AD 58 to 106, as the friend of the Caesars and the king of the Roman-loving Iberians. The remains of the much rebuilt stone bridge Pompey, son of Gnaeus, erected across the Kura, still stands. A Greek building inscription found not far from Mtskheta and dating to AD 75 tells us that Roman engineers had strengthened the walls for the Iberian king. Adasia overthrew the Parthian dynasty and founded the 400-year empire of the Sassanids, 224 to 651. The Zoroastrian god Ahura Mazda makes Adeshi the first Sassanid king of Iran. The Sassanids forced Armenia, invaded pro-Roman Kartli, Iberia, and Albania. The Romans regained Caucasia, briefly under Emperor Aurelian, 270 to 275. The Iranians took advantage of the advantage and established their candidate Mirian III, Meribanes, 284 to 361, son of the great king of Iran, on the throne of eastern Georgia. After the great Roman victory, Iran and Rome signed the Peace of Nisibis, and Mirian was recognized as king of Iberia, and Armenia went to Romans. From the 3rd century AD, Iberian kings had to deal with the Sassanid Iran. Iberia was listed as an integral part of the Sassanid Empire. The Iberian king is considered to be an ally who had followed Iranian wishes, was, as the case with the Roman Sasanian rulers, sent the Iberian kings diplomatic gifts. Cartlis Discoverba tells us that 6 languages were spoken in Iberian cities, including Georgian, Armenian, Hebrew, and Greek. A Jewish community in Mithra, at least from the 2nd century AD. A Judo-Aramaic inscription of Abraham, son of Sarah, from Mithra from the 4th to 6th centuries. So Parthia was never conquered by Rome, and it was really a division between east and west, the sea and the earth. It shows that the dragon, or the Herodian power, gives power to the beast. So it says here in Revelation 13 verse 4, so they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, who is able to make war with him. So this has been a pretty long video now. I never meant to make them so long, but it just keeps going and going. I've been going into the origins of symbols, the symbols that these people use. And as the late Jordan Maxwell used to say, that they tell us who they are through their symbolism. I've been thinking a bit lately about, did we even have a language back in the ancient times? And maybe that's why there is not a great deal of written records. Not because people were illiterate, but simply because people communicated differently. And we look at the Egyptian civilizations, their language was pictures and symbols. People communicated via an image, which communicated so much more than a word. I've been thinking about whether this is what the Tower of Babel was, and how we may be going back into this phase of these giants of the earth, these Nephilim who run our world. And I say that in the means that these people are very powerful. They're no greater than us, they're no bigger than us, but they have a lot of power behind them, and they are metaphorically giants trying to reach heaven. That's their objective. That through Freemasonry, we look at Jacob's ladder and Freemasonry, and it's all a way into heaven without having to go through the Son of God, Jesus. And there is no other way to heaven. The Bible tells us that. We reject the Son of God. We reject God. And why would God want us in his kingdom when we reject him or his family? And there are many movements at the moment, even Christian movements, or people who are rejecting the church, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that, because the church has been so corrupt and so wrong about so many things. But ultimately, at the end of the day, they start to say Jesus is just a symbol for enlightenment. He wasn't who he said he was. And, reject the church, reject all of the Christian indoctrination that you've been given over your life. Why does that include Jesus not being who he said he was? The fundamental fact of the Bible is, no matter if it's been changed or history's been changed, is the point is Jesus is who he said he was, and he came to do a job, and there's something about that job that allows us back into the state of what heaven was. That is the ultimate message of the Bible. Adam and Eve were shut out of the Garden of Eden. They were shut out of being in the kingdom of God, and they had to somehow redeem themselves to get back in. And this is what these elites are into, is trying to enter this kingdom without God, because they reject God. And a rejection of God is what I believe hell, or Tartarus, or as I've said, the land of Nod. It's God cannot be around things that are wicked. He will remove himself from that. And so a rejection of God is placing yourself in a place where there is no light, where it's dark, and being removed from the source of creation. So I'm going to go into a little bit in that in my next video. Sorry this one's been so long. I'm trying to make them a bit shorter in future. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.